Hey, thanks for joining us on 7 Minute Apologetics. I'm your host, David Mao, and today we're talking about the three general periods or epochs of time that we organize into general rubrics. And so we've got three of them: the pre-modern, the modern, and the postmodern. This is generally how sociologists, philosophers, political scientists understand general periods of time and kind of their characteristics. And so we begin with the pre-modern, which is really important to remember that the pre-modern period is not an undeveloped or uncivilized time. Although it begins in kind of that Bronze Iron Age, in the birthplace of civilization. We think about the Tiger and the Euphrates river valleys in Africa. These pre-modern civilizations are very, very advanced. They develop systems of writing. They develop trigonometry and algebra and geometry. They work on things like mapping the stars and trade routes and bartering and monetary systems and very complex systems of government. But the reason that we characterize them as pre-modern is that it's before a time when writing specifically begins to kind of really advance. Dialogue among cultures, trade certainly. It's pre-scientific in the sense that the scientific revolution hasn't really taken hold. The idea of general universal reason isn't quite on the scene yet, and so we do have very important civilizations. You think of the Incas and the Mayas in the North American scene. Obviously, India, the dynasties of China, obviously the great civilizations of Africa. And then everything that's happening in the Middle East that we understand biblically, with the people of Israel, the Israelites. And so culturally, people are focused on things like fertility. They're focused on crops, developing societies. There's kind of that tension between being nomadic and staying in one place, moving with the hunting gathering, as well as, the development of farming. And then in philosophy of things like the problem of the one versus many. And so in Greek philosophy, there's a lot of discussion about the nature of being, which is called ontology later, but generally how we understand substance itself, if it's composed of one specific thing or many different things or constant change. And so you have things like the four basic types of matter, fire, water, air, and earth, that sort of thing. And so things start changing a little bit. We get into kind of a medieval period, which tends to slow things down politically and religiously, and definitely keeps order in Northern Europe while things are advancing, in different parts of the world, in Islamic nations, for example, in Spain, Northern Africa. But then things start changing in Europe, starting with kind of that 14th, 15th century. We start seeing some reaction against the Catholic Church. We start seeing some translation of the Bible into people's dialect and people's common language. And so you have Erasmus's project of translating the scriptures. You start to have developments in the printing press, and all of this kind of leads to that Reformation, which is kind of that middle of the 15th century, which really starts bringing things along in terms of learning and people learning their own language, but also having comparisons between language translations. Obviously, we have figures such as Luther and Zwingli, Jan Hus, Wycliffe, translating the Bible. And so there's a lot of religious tension at the time that kind of leads to, the 30 Years' War and all the religious wars that happened in kind of that 16th century. But also just to kind of keep in mind what's happening in science. And so you have people like Michelangelo, you have Machiavelli in politics. These are all 15th century figures that are really leaning towards modernity in their understanding of reason and their understanding of what's possible. In the 16th century, we have the development of things like astronomy and optics. We have Copernicus's revolution. So we started understanding that we're actually revolving around the sun, and that the Earth isn't the center of the known universe. Things like the development of the understanding of magnetic field, and so the Earth's magnetic field, but also that individual bodies are obviously under motion and have their own magnetic fields. The development of the telescope is 1608, Kepler's laws of planetary motion, 1609. Eventually, Isaac Newton discovers that white light is made up of many different wavelengths in different colors. He also discovers universal gravitation and the three laws of motion. So that's 1687. And so science is rapidly developing at the time, especially astronomy, mathematics. In philosophy, we have kind of parallel developments. Figures such as Thomas Hobbes, 1588, Rene Descartes, 1596, begin to ask big questions about existence, about epistemology, how we know what it is that we know. That's the famous cogito ergo sum that Descartes talks about in his Meditations on First Philosophy. Spinoza comes along in 1632 and starts talking about cosmic rationalism. And so the idea that rationality can understand things apart from experience is kind of coming about. There's obviously a reaction to that later that comes about through figures such as Immanuel Kant, David Hume, for example. John Locke is 1632, and so that's kind of the underpinnings of democracy. And so this modern period is really a reaction to the pre-modern period in that it puts external forms of reason, of government, of philosophy as kind of a template for developing society. And so there begins to be a project for pushing society forward, specifically in Europe. And so in 1648, for example, we have the Treaty of Westphalia. We start developing the modern nation state and an understanding that things will break off from kind of that Holy Roman Empire into individual nation states governed by reason, governed by local governments, really kind of a flourishing of a Greek idea of democracy and also self-rule. And so the rise of science, the rise of skepticism and rationality, the birth of the nation state all characterize modernity. And this continues from kind of that 16th century all the way up until that idea is start to be critiqued. So you have post-structuralists that start understanding the importance of language. These are figures such as Michael Foucault, Ludwig